Blood trickled down Elijah's cheek as the entire cabin fell silent. At 30,000 feet, 7-year-old Elijah Parker had just been slapped by a white businessman who spat, "Keep your filthy hands off my seat." The red handprint burned on the child's dark skin as tears welled in his eyes. No one moved, until Army veteran Marcus Daniels rose from seat 14C, his prosthetic leg gleaming under the cabin lights. "Sir," Marcus addressed the businessman with ice in his voice, "you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Before we continue this shocking true story, where are you watching from today? If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories that expose the reality many face every day. What would you have done if you witnessed this moment? The Boeing 737 had been in the air for just over an hour when the first signs of trouble began. 7-year-old Elijah Parker sat in seat 15B, his small fingers tapping anxiously on the tray table as he peered out the window at the cotton candy clouds. His mother, Tamara Parker, a 32-year-old single mom with warm brown eyes and a perpetually worried expression, sat beside him reviewing medical documents on her tablet. They were flying from Atlanta to Boston, where Elijah was scheduled, for specialized treatment at Boston Children's Hospital, for a rare neurological condition that compounded his ADHD symptoms. This appointment had taken 8 months to secure, and Tamara had worked double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse to afford the trip. "Mommy, how much longer?" Elijah whispered, his legs swinging, unable to reach the floor. His royal blue dinosaur backpack was stuffed under the seat in front of him, occasionally nudged by his restless feet. "Still 2 more hours, baby. Try to stay calm. Remember your breathing exercises." Tamara whispered back, placing a gentle hand on his bouncing knee. She could feel the eyes of the passenger in front of Elijah boring into them through the gap between seats. Warren Kensington, a 54-year-old white businessman in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit, had been shifting uncomfortably and sighing dramatically each time Elijah's movement jostled his seat. His thinning blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, his manicured hands adorned with a heavy gold signet ring that caught the light whenever he pointedly adjusted his seat back. "Control your child," he had muttered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear when they first boarded. At the time, Tamara had chosen to ignore him, focusing instead on getting Elijah settled with his comfort items and medication. But as the flight progressed, Warren's irritation grew. Each time Elijah fidgeted or accidentally kicked the seat, Warren would tense visibly, his neck reddening. "I paid for first class but got downgraded due to an equipment change," he complained to the businessman beside him. "Now I'm stuck in economy with people who don't know how to parent their children." His companion, a balding man in his 60s, nodded sympathetically but cast an uncomfortable glance toward Tamara, who pretended not to hear. "Elijah, sweetie, why don't you draw for a while?" Tamara suggested, pulling out a coloring book and crayons from her bag. Elijah nodded eagerly, but in his excitement to open the new package of crayons, he dropped several that rolled under Warren's seat. Without thinking, the boy unbuckled and knelt on his seat, reaching forward to retrieve them. His small hands inadvertently pushed Warren's seat as he struggled to reach the fallen crayons. "That's it," Warren snapped, whirling around in his seat with such force that his complimentary cocktail sloshed onto his pants. "I've had enough of this." His face was contorted with rage as he glared at Elijah, who froze in fear. "I'm trying to conduct business on this flight, and I can't concentrate with your constant disruptions." Tamara immediately placed a protective arm around her son. "I apologize if he disturbed you, sir. He has ADHD and we're actually traveling for medical treatment." Warren's lip curled in disgust. "Of course he does. Everyone's kid has some excuse these days. When I was growing up, we called it bad parenting and poor discipline." He looked Elijah up and down with disdain. Or maybe it's just the way some people's children are naturally wired. The racist undertone wasn't lost on Tamara or the surrounding passengers who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A Hispanic woman across the aisle averted her eyes, while an elderly white couple exchanged disapproving glances, though it wasn't clear if their disapproval was directed at Warren or Elijah. Tamara took a deep breath, her nurse's training kicking in as she managed her rising anger. "Sir, I'd appreciate if you didn't make assumptions about my son or my parenting. We're doing our best in a challenging situation. Warren scoffed. Your best clearly isn't good enough. Some people shouldn't fly if they can't control their offspring. He turned back around, muttering just loud enough to be heard. Typical. They always have excuses. Elijah, sensing his mother's distress, tried even harder to sit still, his small body practically vibrating with the effort. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'll be good." The flight attendant, Jessica Bell, a 27-year-old with a practiced smile and blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, approached with the beverage cart. She leaned down toward Warren. "Is everything all right here, sir?" Warren immediately launched into a complaint. "No, everything is not all right. This child behind me has been kicking my seat and disrupting the entire flight. I've asked politely for the mother to control him, but apparently that's too much to ask." Jessica glanced back at Tamara and Elijah, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm sure no one wants to be uncomfortable. Perhaps we could find you another seat, sir." Warren's eyes narrowed. "Why should I be the one to move? I reserved this specific seat for legroom." Before Jessica could respond, Elijah accidentally dropped his tablet, which slid forward and bumped against Warren's seat again. It was a small nudge, barely perceptible, but it was the match that lit the powder keg. Warren unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up in one fluid motion, towering over the mother and child. "That's it," he roared, his face purple with rage. Before anyone could react, his hand flashed out, striking Elijah across the face with an open palm. The slap echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Blood trickled from where Warren's signet ring had caught Elijah's cheek, and a perfect red handprint bloomed on the boy's dark skin. "Keep your filthy hands off my seat," Warren bellowed. The entire cabin froze in stunned silence. Elijah's small body went rigid with shock before he collapsed into silent, heaving sobs against his mother's side. Tamara's face transformed from shock to protective fury, but before she could even unbuckle her seatbelt, movement from several rows ahead caught everyone's attention. Marcus Daniels, a 38-year-old Black Army veteran seated in 14C, rose to his full 6'3" height. His prosthetic leg, a reminder of his service in Afghanistan, gleamed dully under the cabin lights as he made his way deliberately toward Warren. The businessman's smug expression faltered as Marcus approached, the veteran's military bearing unmistakable. "Sir," Marcus addressed Warren, his deep voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin, "you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Warren attempted to puff himself up. "This is none of your business. That kid has been a nuisance the entire flight." Marcus's expression remained calm, but his eyes were flint. "I've been watching. The only nuisance on this flight is the grown man who just assaulted a 7-year-old child with special needs." He stepped closer, dropping his voice so only Warren could hear. "I've faced Taliban fighters with more humanity than you're showing right now." He raised his voice again, addressing the entire cabin. "Did everyone witness what just happened? This man struck a child." Murmurs of confirmation rippled through the plane. Warren's confidence began to waver as he realized the tide of public opinion was turning against him. "He was disrupting my journey. I have rights as a paying customer." Jessica, the flight attendant, pushed past several frozen passengers. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately. Striking another passenger is a federal offense." She turned to Warren. "Sir, I need you to come with me to a different seat while we sort this out." Warren's face contorted with indignation. "Me? What about them? This is outrageous." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some turbulence ahead. All passengers and crew need to return to their seats and fasten seatbelts immediately." Jessica looked torn, clearly wanting to separate Warren from Elijah and Tamara, but bound by safety protocols. Marcus didn't budge. "I'll return to my seat when this man is moved away from this child." Warren sneered. "Do you know who I am? You can't dictate where I sit." Marcus's expression didn't change. "I know exactly what you are. And unless you want to find out what happens when you assault a child in front of a plane full of witnesses, you'll find another seat. Now." Something in Marcus's steady gaze must have communicated the seriousness of the situation, because Warren suddenly grabbed his laptop bag and pushed past Jessica. "This is ridiculous. I'll be filing complaints against this entire airline. You haven't heard the last of this." As Warren stormed toward the front of the plane, Jessica quickly knelt beside Elijah. "Let me get you some ice for that cheek, sweetie." She glanced up at Tamara with an apologetic expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm so sorry this happened. I'll bring a first aid kit right away." As she hurried off, Marcus took the now vacant seat next to Tamara, turning to face her and Elijah. "I'm Marcus Daniels, former Army medic. Is it okay if I take a look at that cut?" Tamara nodded gratefully, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." As Marcus gently examined Elijah's cheek, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to air traffic control issues at Boston Logan, we're being placed in a holding pattern. Our new estimated arrival time is approximately 90 minutes later than scheduled. We apologize for the inconvenience." Tamara's face fell. "We can't miss this appointment. It took months to schedule." Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "First things first. Let's take care of this brave young man and then we'll figure out the rest." But as Jessica returned with the first aid kit, they all noticed Warren in the front row, furiously typing on his phone, occasionally turning to glare at them with a look that promised this conflict was far from over. The ice pack pressed against Elijah's swollen cheek brought temporary relief, but the emotional wounds cut deeper than any physical pain. Marcus Daniels remained in the seat beside them, his military training evident in the way he scanned the cabin, keeping a watchful eye on Warren Kensington, who had been relocated to the front row. "You're being so brave, little man," Marcus said softly to Elijah, whose sobs had quieted to occasional sniffles. "When I was about your age, I had a teacher who treated me differently because of my skin color. Made me sit in the back. Never called on me even when I raised my hand first." Elijah looked up, curiosity momentarily overriding his distress. "What did you do?" Marcus smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I studied twice as hard, got the highest grades in class. My grandmother always told me, excellence is your best revenge. But you know what?" He leaned closer conspiratorially. "It shouldn't have to be that way. No child should face discrimination, and what happened to you today was wrong on every level." Tamara wiped away tears, one hand still clutching her son's small fingers. "Thank you again for stepping in. So many people just watched." A middle-aged white woman across the aisle leaned over, offering a package of cookies. "For the little one," she said with a kind smile. "My grandson has ADHD too. It's not easy traveling." An Asian businessman a few rows back approached cautiously. "I recorded what happened on my phone," he said quietly. "If you need a witness statement for the police, I'd be happy to provide it." One by one, other passengers began showing small gestures of support. A college student offered Elijah her tablet loaded with games. An elderly black couple moved to sit nearby, forming a protective barrier between the Parkers and the front of the plane, where Warren sat seething. "Sometimes good people find their courage after the initial shock wears off," Marcus observed. "Reminds me of my unit in Afghanistan. When things got rough, we discovered who we really were." Jessica, the flight attendant, returned with forms for Tamara to complete. "These are incident reports," she explained, her voice professional but her eyes not quite meeting Tamara's. "The captain has radioed ahead and airport police will meet the plane to take statements." She hesitated. "I should warn you that Mr. Kensington is demanding to press charges for harassment." Tamara's face darkened. "Harassment? My 7-year-old son was physically assaulted." Jessica nodded quickly. "Of course, that's why the police will be involved." As she walked away, Marcus frowned. Something's off about her response. Too rehearsed. He glanced toward the front of the plane where Warren was engaged in an intense phone conversation, gesturing angrily. "That man is pulling strings already." The plane began its descent into Boston Logan International Airport, the captain announcing they were finally cleared for landing. Elijah clutched his dinosaur backpack, his eyes wide with renewed anxiety. "Will the police arrest me, Mommy?" Tamara hugged him tightly. No, baby. You did nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, the flight crew asked all passengers to remain seated. 2 uniformed airport police officers boarded, followed by a plainclothes detective. To everyone's surprise, Warren immediately stood and approached them, speaking rapidly and pointing toward Elijah and Tamara. The detective nodded, making notes as passengers began murmuring in confusion. Marcus stood up. Officer, I'm a direct witness to what happened. This man, he pointed at Warren, physically assaulted that child, unprovoked. The detective glanced at Marcus, expression unreadable. We'll take statements from everyone involved, sir. Please remain seated for now. Warren's voice carried through the cabin. The boy was violently kicking my seat throughout the flight. I merely reached back to stop him and he scratched me. Look! He thrust his hand forward, showing a small scratch that hadn't been there during the actual incident. Marcus opened his mouth to object, but the detective raised a hand. Sir, we'll get to your statement. Please be patient. The Asian businessman stood up. I have video evidence of what actually happened. Warren's face paled slightly before he regained his composure. That's a violation of privacy laws. You had no right to record me without consent. The businessman looked uncertain, and the detective intervened. Let's continue this conversation off the aircraft. Mr. Kensington, if you'll come with Officer Chen. Ma'am, he addressed Tamara. You and your son will need to come with Officer Wallace and myself. Anyone with relevant information, please wait at Gate C-42 to provide statements. As they deplaned, Marcus stayed close to Tamara and Elijah, his military bearing seemingly deterring Warren from further confrontation. In the terminal, they were separated into different rooms. Hours passed as statements were taken. The Asian businessman's phone was examined, but suddenly there seemed to be technical issues accessing the video. That's impossible, he protested. I just viewed it on the plane. The airport security footage from the gate area was requested, but was reportedly unavailable due to a system upgrade that coincidentally had been in progress. Meanwhile, Elijah grew increasingly distressed in the small interrogation room, his medical condition making it nearly impossible for him to sit still during the lengthy questioning. He needs his medication, Tamara pleaded. Our luggage is probably still on the carousel, please. When they were finally released, they found Marcus waiting for them, his face grim. Warren was out within 30 minutes, he informed them. Made some calls and suddenly he's walking free while you were detained for questioning. Tamara checked her watch and gasped. The hospital appointment, we've missed it. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. 8 months of waiting, gone. Marcus's jaw tightened. This isn't over. My connecting flight to Chicago left hours ago, but I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone. He pulled out his phone. Let me make some calls. I've got an old army buddy who practices law here in Boston. As they collected their luggage and headed for the taxi stand, they spotted Warren being escorted to a waiting black SUV, his expression smug as he spotted them. He held up his phone, deliberately taking their picture before sliding into the vehicle. What was that about? Tamara wondered aloud, pulling Elijah closer. Marcus's expression darkened. Nothing good. We need to be prepared. Men like that don't accept being stood up to. They hit back harder. As their taxi pulled away from the curb, none of them noticed Jessica, the flight attendant watching from the terminal, her expression conflicted as she clutched her phone, thumb hovering over a message she'd typed but hadn't yet sent. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered why more people don't speak up? Comment number 1 if you believe Marcus did the right thing by intervening, or number 2 if you think he should have minded his own business. Like and subscribe to show your support for those who stand against injustice. What do you think Warren is planning with that phone call? And will Elijah get the medical treatment he desperately needs? The battle is just beginning. The Boston skyline glittered against the darkening sky as Tamara tucked Elijah into the hotel bed. The boy had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep after hours of anxiety and tears. The missed medical appointment weighed heavily on her mind as she gently brushed his curls away from the bandage covering his cheek. How's he doing? Marcus asked softly from the doorway connecting their adjoining rooms. Tamara had initially been hesitant to accept his offer to book the room next to theirs, but after the events of the day, she was grateful for his protective presence. Finally asleep, she whispered, joining Marcus in the sitting area and closing the bedroom door part way. I called the hospital again, but they can't reschedule until next month at the earliest. Marcus frowned, setting his laptop on the coffee table. That's not right. Let me see if my contacts can help push it through. Sooner. He paused, his expression grave. There's something you should see. He turned the screen toward her, revealing a social media post that had already garnered thousands of shares. The headline read, "Unruly child attacks businessman on flight. Father threatens violence." Below was a professionally taken photo of Warren Kensington looking distinguished in a business setting, contrasted with a blurry shot of Marcus standing in the airplane aisle, his expression stern. The story beneath painted Warren as the victim of an out-of-control child and an aggressive man who had threatened him. Tamara's hand flew to her mouth. That's not what happened at all. How can they print these lies? Marcus scrolled down, revealing the source, Boston Business Journal, a subsidiary of Kensington Media Group. He owns the outlet, and not just this one. He opened several more tabs, each showing similar versions of the story appearing across multiple news platforms. Kensington Media Group controls 17 news outlets across the country. He's flooding the zone with his version before the truth can get out. Tamara's phone buzzed with a notification, then another, and another. She picked it up with trembling hands to find her social media accounts flooded with hateful messages from strangers. Teach your kids some manners, read one. Some people shouldn't be allowed to have children, said another. More disturbing were the ones that included their hotel name and vague threats about paying them a visit. How did they find us? She whispered, panic rising. Marcus took her phone gently. The photo he took at the airport. It probably has location data embedded. We need to move you somewhere safer. He began gathering their few unpacked belongings. My army buddy Alex is expecting us. He's got a guest house where you'll be safe until we figure this out. As they hurriedly packed, Tamara's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. After a moment's hesitation, she answered on speaker. Mrs. Parker? A formal voice inquired. This is Dr. Williams from Boston Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your son's rescheduled appointment. Tamara's heart leapt. Yes, thank you for calling back so quickly. The doctor's tone remained clinical. I'm afraid there's been a security concern raised about your upcoming visit. We've received reports of a potential disruption, and as such, we're implementing additional screening protocols. Marcus and Tamara exchanged alarmed glances. Security concern? What are you talking about? Dr. Williams cleared his throat. We've received information that your son's case may draw unwanted media attention that could disrupt hospital operations. For the safety of all patients, we need to postpone until the situation resolves. Tamara fought to keep her voice steady. My son needs specialized treatment that only your facility provides in this region. This appointment took 8 months to secure. I understand, Mrs. Parker, but hospital policy is clear. We'll contact you when circumstances change. The call ended abruptly, leaving Tamara staring at her phone in disbelief. This can't be happening, she whispered. Elijah needs that treatment. His condition will worsen without it. Marcus's expression hardened. Kensington's reach is longer than I thought, but two can play at this game. He pulled out his own phone and began typing rapidly. What are you doing? Tamara asked, peering over his shoulder. Fighting back. Truth for Elijah. He showed her the hashtag he'd created, attaching a concise account of what had actually occurred on the plane, careful to include only verifiable facts. I've got 5,000 followers from my veterans advocacy work. Not huge, but enough to start a counter-narrative. Within hours, as they settled into the secluded guest house belonging to Marcus's friend Alexandra West, the hashtag began gaining traction. Veterans groups amplified it, followed by civil rights organizations and child welfare advocates. But, for every supporter, there seemed to be two detractors questioning their story, or outright calling them liars. The real blow came shortly before midnight when Tamara received an email from her employer. Due to the controversial nature of your recent public situation and its potential impact on our hospital's reputation, we are placing you on administrative leave effective immediately. She collapsed onto the sofa, the phone slipping from her fingers. I can't lose my job. It's how I pay for Elijah's treatments. Marcus sat beside her, his normally confident expression faltering for the first time. I'm so sorry, Tamara. This is getting out of hand. He picked up the remote to turn on the news, then immediately wished he hadn't. There on the screen was Warren Kensington himself, being interviewed by a sympathetic host on a national news program. I've always been an advocate for children with special needs, he was saying, his expression a perfect mask of concern. That's why this incident was so disturbing. When a child becomes violent on an aircraft, it creates a dangerous situation for everyone aboard. The host nodded solemnly. And you're saying the father threatened you? Warren nodded, touching his cheek where a scratch had mysteriously appeared. I feared for my safety. These kinds of intimidation tactics have no place in civil society. As the interview continued, a breaking news banner appeared across the bottom of the screen. Exclusive. CEO Warren Kensington reveals he is major donor to children's special needs programs. Marcus switched off the television in disgust. He's trying to inoculate himself against accusations of prejudice while simultaneously destroying your credibility. Tamara wiped away tears. What kind of person does this to a child? The answer came the next morning when Alexandra West, Marcus's friend and a civil rights attorney, arrived with a thick folder of research. Warren Kensington, 54, CEO, and majority shareholder of Kensington Media Group, she read from her notes. Divorced 3 times, no children, built his empire by acquiring struggling local news outlets and turning them into profitable enterprises through cost-cutting and sensationalism. She looked up grimly. And he's planning to run for Senate next year on a family values platform. Alexandra, a formidable African-American woman in her early 40s with precise diction and a take-no-prisoners attitude, spread several documents across the kitchen table. He's using his media platform to control the narrative, but we can fight back. First, we document everything. Then we file assault charges against him for attacking Elijah. Marcus leaned forward. What about the video evidence that conveniently disappeared? Alexandra's expression was grim. Working on it. My paralegal is reaching out to passengers from the flight manifest. We'll find witnesses. A notification chimed on Marcus's phone. Speaking of witnesses, he held up the screen showing a direct message from a private account. I was the flight attendant on your flight. I want to help. Can we meet somewhere private? Alexandra's eyes narrowed. Could be a trap. Tell her public place only and I'm coming with you. While they arranged the meeting, Tamara sat with Elijah in the guest bedroom, trying to keep his spirits up despite his increasing symptoms. Without his scheduled treatment, his condition was beginning to deteriorate. The subtle tremor in his hands had worsened, and his ability to focus had decreased dramatically. When can we go home, Mommy? He asked, his voice small. Tamara forced a smile. Soon, baby. We just need to fix a few things first. That evening, as Marcus and Alexandra prepared to meet Jessica at a busy coffee shop downtown, Tamara's phone lit up with a news alert that made her blood run cold. Breaking. Child Services investigation opened in Parker case, the headline read. The article cited anonymous sources close to the investigation, claiming that Elijah's behavior on the flight raised questions about his home environment. He's coming after my child, Tamara whispered in horror. He's trying to take my, son. The offices of West Legal Partners occupied the 14th floor of a sleek downtown Boston building, offering panoramic views of the harbor that no one in the conference room was appreciating. Alexandra West paced the length of the polished table, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor as she dictated notes to her assistant. File for emergency injunctive relief against Kensington Media Group for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Add claims for civil rights violations under Massachusetts state law. She paused, turning to Tamara, who sat hunched in an ergonomic chair, dark circles under her eyes from another sleepless night. The lawsuit he filed this morning is frivolous, designed to drain your resources and intimidate you into silence. Marcus, who had been on his phone coordinating with veteran support groups, looked up sharply. He's suing Tamara? On what grounds? Alexandra's expression was grim. Defamation, claiming the social media campaign has damaged his reputation. He's also claiming psychological trauma from what he describes as an orchestrated harassment campaign. She picked up the legal document, heavy with legal jargon and outrageous accusations. He's asking for $2 million in damages. Tamara's shoulders slumped further. I can't afford a lawyer, let alone fight a lawsuit. And now with my job suspended? Marcus squeezed her hand reassuringly. You have us. Alex is taking your case pro bono. Alexandra nodded firmly. Damn right I am. Men like Kensington think they can use the legal system as a weapon against people with fewer resources. Not on my watch. She tapped her tablet, bringing up a calendar. We've got the meeting with Jessica Bell in 2 hours. If she really does have evidence from the flight, it could change everything. While Alexandra prepared for the meeting, Tamara called Boston Children's Hospital again, pleading for an earlier appointment for Elijah, whose symptoms were worsening daily. The hospital administrator was apologetic, but firm. I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, but there's nothing available sooner. Perhaps you might consider alternative treatments. The suggestion that her son's specialized neurological care could be replaced with alternatives confirmed Tamara's suspicions that Kensington's influence had reached the hospital as well. Marcus, overhearing the conversation, immediately began researching other medical facilities in neighboring states. There's a specialist in New York who might be able to help, he suggested. I've got a buddy who could drive us down if needed. The coffee shop where they'd arranged to meet Jessica was bustling with afternoon customers, providing both cover and witnesses if anything went wrong. Alexandra insisted on arriving 30 minutes early to secure a corner table with clear sightlines to all exits. Military tactics apply surprisingly well to legal strategy, she commented to Marcus, who nodded appreciatively. Jessica arrived precisely on time, her confident flight attendant demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. She wore civilian clothes and large sunglasses, glancing nervously around the cafe before approaching their table. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly, sliding into the chair with her back to the wall. I don't have much time. Alexandra cut straight to the point. You said you wanted to help. What information do you have about the incident? Jessica took a deep breath. What happened on that flight was exactly as you described. The boy didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Kensington was aggressive from the moment he boarded, complaining about being downgraded from first class. She lowered her voice further. Here's what you don't know. The cockpit voice recorder captures ambient sound from the first few rows of the cabin. It would have recorded the entire confrontation, including his slap and racial comments. Marcus leaned forward. That evidence would be irrefutable. Can you access it? Jessica shook her head. That's the problem. Those recordings are automatically stored, but someone requested this particular segment be accidentally overwritten barely an hour after we landed. She pulled out her phone. But I made a copy first. Flight attendants are trained to document disruptive incidents, and I had a feeling this would get complicated. As she began to pull up the audio file, Alexandra stopped her. Not here. This needs to be properly preserved as evidence with chain of custody documentation. She handed Jessica her card. Come to my office tomorrow morning. We'll take your official statement and secure the recording properly. Jessica hesitated. There's something else you should know. Kensington Worldwide Holdings owns 30% of Meridian Airlines' parent company. When he made those calls, from the plane, he wasn't just contacting his lawyers. He was calling our corporate headquarters. The revelation that Warren's influence extended to the airline itself explained the company's tepid response and the evidence disappearing. As Jessica left, promising to come to Alexandra's office the next morning, none of them noticed the man at a nearby table who had been particularly interested in their conversation. That evening, as they reviewed strategy in Alexandra's office, Tamara received an unexpected call from the court. "Mrs. Parker, this is Judge Holloway's clerk. The judge has granted Mr. Kensington's request for a temporary restraining order. You and your representatives are prohibited from making any public statements regarding the incident pending litigation." Alexandra grabbed the phone. "This is Alexandra West, Mrs. Parker's attorney of record. We received no notice of this hearing. This is procedurally improper and—" The clerk cut her off. "The judge determined this qualified as an emergency ex parte hearing due to ongoing reputational harm. You'll receive the official documentation shortly. Violation of the order could result in contempt charges." After the call ended, Alexandra was furious. "Judge Holloway, that's no coincidence. I need to check campaign finance records." Her paralegal pulled up the information within minutes, confirming their suspicions. Kensington and his companies donated $50,000 to Judge Holloway's re-election campaign last year. Marcus shook his head in disgust. "So we're silenced while he continues to spread his version through his media empire?" Alexandra's expression was grim. "For now. But this overreach will backfire. No judge likes having their impartiality questioned, and this connection gives us grounds for requesting a different judge." They worked late into the night preparing countermotions and their own lawsuit against Kensington. Around midnight, Tamara called to check on Elijah, who was being watched by Alexandra's trusted assistant at the guest house. The news wasn't good. "He had another anxiety attack," the assistant reported. "He keeps asking when he can go home and why the bad man hurt him." Tamara fought back tears. "Tell him I'll be there soon, and leave the nightlight on." As they gathered their belongings to leave, Alexandra's phone rang. It was her paralegal, who had stayed to monitor incoming legal communications. "You need to see this right away," he said urgently. Kensington's lawyers just filed for an emergency psychological evaluation of Elijah, claiming his violent tendencies represent a threat requiring court intervention. Tamara froze, her worst fears materializing. "They're trying to take my son." Alexandra's expression hardened into steel determination. "Over my dead body. This crosses every line." She turned to Marcus. "Call every contact you have. Veterans, groups, civil rights organizations, parent advocacy networks. We can't speak publicly because of the gag order, but nothing stops others from rallying to Elijah's cause." As they left the building, the weight of what they were facing pressed down on them. Warren Kensington had money, media control, political connections, and now the initial advantage in court. Against these resources stood a suspended nurse, a disabled veteran, and a determined attorney, fighting not just for justice, but for a 7-year-old boy's future. What none of them realized was that Jessica never made it home that night. After leaving the coffee shop, she'd been approached by airline security and escorted to a meeting with corporate executives where she now sat, facing termination for breach of confidentiality protocols. Unless she surrendered every copy of the evidence and signed a non-disclosure agreement that would silence her permanently. Boston Children's Hospital stood like a beacon of hope against the cloudy morning sky, its modern glass facade reflecting the promise of healing for thousands of children each year. For Elijah Parker, it represented his best chance at managing the neurological condition that, combined with his ADHD, made everyday activities a challenge. But as Tamara led her son through the sliding doors of the neurology department, that hope was tinged with apprehension. Elijah's symptoms had worsened considerably in the days since the flight incident. The tremor in his hands had become more pronounced, making it difficult for him to hold a crayon or spoon. His concentration had deteriorated further, and he'd begun experiencing sporadic muscle spasms that sometimes made walking difficult. Marcus accompanied them, having rescheduled his own veteran's medical appointment in Chicago to remain with the Parkers. Alexandra had stayed behind to prepare for an emergency hearing scheduled for the following day, hoping to get the gag order lifted and counter Kensington's legal maneuvers. The receptionist at the check-in desk looked up as they approached, her welcoming smile faltering slightly as recognition dawned in her eyes. "Parker, for Dr. Lawson at 9:30, Tamara said, trying to ignore the woman's changed demeanor. The receptionist tapped at her computer, her mouth forming a tight line. Yes, I see the appointment here. Please take a seat. The doctor is running a bit behind schedule this morning. They settled into the waiting area where Elijah tried to focus on a puzzle book that Marcus had bought him. Other families in the waiting room occasionally glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with poorly disguised recognition. Tamara realized with a sinking feeling that Warren Kensington's media campaign had been effective. She was grateful for the hospital's strict no photography policy that at least prevented anyone from surreptitiously taking their picture. After nearly an hour of waiting, long after patients who had arrived after them had been called back, a nurse finally appeared. "Parker, this way, please." The examination room was standard issue, with bright animal murals intended to put young patients at ease. Dr. Lawson, a neurologist in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, entered shortly, after his gaze fixed firmly on his tablet rather than meeting their eyes. "Mrs. Parker, and this must be Elijah." His tone was clinically detached, lacking the warmth he'd shown during their video consultation months earlier. He performed a cursory examination, frowning at Elijah's tremor, but making minimal notes. "The treatment protocol we discussed previously involves a specialized medication regimen and targeted neural therapy," he said eventually, still not making eye contact. "However, given the complexity of Elijah's case, I'd like to suggest some alternative approaches." Tamara straightened in her chair. "Alternative? Dr. Lawson, we specifically came to you because the conventional treatments haven't been effective. Your pioneering work with transcranial magnetic stimulation was showing promising results in cases like Elijah's." Dr. Lawson shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, upon further review of his case, I'm not certain he's an ideal candidate for the TMS trial." "What changed?" Marcus asked, his military training making the question sound more like a demand than a query. "His symptoms have only worsened since our last consultation." The doctor's eyes flicked to Marcus, then away. "We have strict protocols for clinical trials. Participants can't have complicating factors." "What complicating factors?" Tamara pressed. "His condition is exactly as documented in all the records we sent." Dr. Lawson cleared his throat. "There are behavioral considerations as well, recent incidents that suggest impulse control issues beyond what's typical for his diagnosis." The implication was clear. Kensington's version of events portraying Elijah as violent and uncontrollable had reached the hospital. Tamara stood, anger replacing her initial shock. "My son was the victim of assault by an adult man. He did nothing wrong." Dr. Lawson finally looked directly at her, a flash of genuine regret crossing his features before being replaced by professional distance. "Mrs. Parker, I can only make recommendations based on the medical information available to me." "And what information is that exactly?" Marcus interjected, "because it sounds like you've been reading tabloid stories rather than medical reports." The doctor stiffened. "I'll provide you with some resources for alternative therapies that might help manage his symptoms until," he hesitated, "until circumstances change." As he turned to leave, Tamara grabbed her son's hand. "This isn't right, and you know it. What happened to first, do no harm." The doctor paused at the door, his back to them. "I'm sorry, I truly am." After he left, Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Alexandra. Something's very wrong here." While Tamara comforted a confused and disappointed Elijah, Marcus stepped into the hallway. He returned minutes later, his expression grim. "Alex is looking into the hospital's funding sources. She'll meet us in the cafeteria in 20 minutes. They made their way to the hospital cafeteria, finding a quiet corner table where Elijah could eat the lunch they'd packed while they waited for Alexandra. The attorney arrived looking harried but determined, a thick folder tucked under her arm. "I had to reschedule court prep, but this couldn't wait," she said, sliding into a chair. She opened her folder, revealing printouts of financial documents. Boston Children's Hospital Foundation received a $10 million donation from the Kensington Family Trust last year, specifically earmarked for the neurology department. Tamara's fork clattered to the table. "10 million? Alexandra nodded grimly. "And there's more. The hospital's board of directors includes 3 senior executives from companies owned by Kensington Media Group. Marcus swore under his breath. So that's why they're suddenly claiming Elijah isn't a candidate for treatment. Kensington's pulling strings here too. Alexandra gathered the documents. We need to confront the hospital administration directly. This is medical malpractice, potentially discrimination, and definitely an ethics violation. They made their way to the administrative offices on the top floor, Alexandra leading with professional determination. The receptionist tried to turn them away, citing the need for appointments, but Alexandra was insistent. This is regarding a potential violation of patient rights and medical ethics. Either we speak to the chief medical officer now, or our next conversation will be with state licensing authorities and the press. The threat was enough to gain them entry to a conference room, where they waited for nearly 30 minutes before Dr. Harrington, the hospital's CMO, appeared. He was accompanied by the hospital's legal counsel, a clear sign they anticipated conflict. Ms. West, Dr. Harrington began, his tone carefully neutral. I understand you have concerns about a patient's treatment plan. Alexandra laid out their case methodically, presenting the evidence of Kensington's financial influence and the sudden change in Elijah's treatment plan, despite no medical justification. Tamara added her first-hand account of Dr. Lawson's changed demeanor and recommendations. Dr. Harrington listened impassively before responding. While I appreciate your concerns, I must point out that treatment decisions are made by our physicians based on their clinical judgment. It would be inappropriate for administration to intervene in medical decisions. Alexandra leaned forward. And would it also be inappropriate for a major donor to intervene in those decisions? Because that appears to be exactly what's happening here. The hospital's legal counsel spoke up. That's a serious allegation without evidence. The hospital categorically denies that any donor influences patient care decisions. Marcus had remained silent until now. Then explain why a child who was deemed an ideal candidate for a groundbreaking treatment last month is suddenly unqualified, right after being publicly maligned by your $10 million donor. The tension in the room was palpable as Dr. Harrington's gaze shifted to Elijah, who sat quietly next to Tamara, his hands trembling more noticeably than before. Something in the boy's expression, a mixture of confusion, hurt, and resignation, seemed to affect the CMO. I'll review Dr. Lawson's notes personally and ensure that all decisions are medically sound, he said finally. But I must ask that you refrain from making unfounded accusations against this institution. As they prepared to leave, the hospital's security team appeared at the door. Is there a problem here? The lead guard asked, hand resting meaningfully on his radio. No problem, Alexandra replied smoothly. We were just concluding our discussion. The implied threat was clear. They were being watched, their movements within the hospital monitored. As they made their way back to the elevator, Marcus pulled out his phone to record a video confrontation, but Alexandra stopped him. Not here, that's exactly what they want, an excuse to have us removed and possibly arrested for causing a disturbance. The security team followed at a discreet distance as they collected Elijah's medical records from the neurology department and headed for the exit. In the lobby, they passed a large donor wall where the Kensington Family Trust was prominently displayed in the highest platinum category. Outside in the parking garage, they finally felt they could speak freely. They just denied care to a 7-year-old child because of a wealthy donor's vendetta, Tamara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. How is this happening in America? Marcus helped Elijah into the car. Money, power, influence. The same weapons that have been used against marginalized communities forever. Alexandra was already on her phone, dictating notes for new legal filings. This changes our strategy. We're adding medical discrimination and patient rights violations to our lawsuit. As they drove away from the hospital, Tamara held Elijah's hand, trying to explain in simple terms why he couldn't get the help they'd come for. Sometimes, baby, people with a lot of money think the rules don't apply to them. But we're going to show them they're wrong. Elijah looked up at her with eyes too old for his 7 years. Is it because of my skin color? Like Marcus said on the plane? The question hung in the air, its terrible simplicity laying bare the ugliness they were fighting against. None of the adults could find the words to respond. Did your heart break for Elijah when the hospital denied him treatment? Comment number 1, if you think the hospital betrayed their oath to do no harm. Or number 2, if you believe they were just protecting their interests. Like this video if you've ever witnessed how money and power can corrupt essential institutions, and subscribe to see how Tamara and Marcus fight back against this injustice. Will Elijah ever get the medical care he desperately needs? And how far will Kensington go to silence them? The battle is entering dangerous territory. The sun had barely risen when a gentle knock at the door of Alexandra's guest house startled Tamara awake. She'd been sleeping lightly, one arm protectively around Elijah, who had finally fallen asleep after another night of nightmares. Marcus, who had taken to sleeping on the living room sofa to provide an extra layer of security, was already at the door with Alexandra, speaking in hushed tones with a woman Tamara didn't recognize. "It's okay," Alexandra called softly, noting Tamara's apprehension. "This is Reverend Diane Johnson from First Community Church. She's here to help." Reverend Johnson, a dignified black woman in her 60s with silver locks and kind eyes, approached Tamara with a gentle smile. "Ms. West told me what you and your son are going through. Our church community wants to offer support." As Tamara pulled on a robe and joined them in the kitchen, Reverend Johnson explained that her congregation had a long history of providing safe harbor for families facing discrimination and injustice. "We have a network of homes where you and Elijah can stay, rotating every few days to ensure your safety and privacy. These are families who understand what it means to face systemic racism and are committed to standing against it." The offer brought tears to Tamara's eyes. After days of feeling like the whole world was against them, this expression of solidarity was overwhelming. "Why would you help strangers like this?" Reverend Johnson took her hand. "Because we've been where you are. Different circumstances perhaps, but the same fight. And because it's right." With their funds dwindling and concerns about security at Alexandra's guest house growing after suspicious vehicles had been spotted driving by multiple times, Tamara gratefully accepted the offer. Within hours, they had packed their essential belongings and moved to the First Safe House, a cozy basement apartment in the home of a retired professor and his wife. As the days passed, they moved between different homes in the network. A nurse practitioner with grown children, a young couple who ran a community center, an elderly woman whose own son had faced discrimination in the school system decades earlier. Each family provided not just shelter but also meals, emotional support, and sometimes childcare, so Tamara could attend legal meetings with Alexandra. Meanwhile, Marcus had been reaching out to every medical contact he could find, searching for alternative treatment options for Elijah, whose condition continued to deteriorate. The daily moves and constant stress weren't helping the boy's health, but they had little choice given the circumstances. Alexandra's legal team had filed motions to have Judge Holloway recused due to his financial connections to Kensington, but the process was moving slowly through the court system. On the 5th day after leaving the hospital, Tamara received an unexpected message on her secured email account that Alexandra had set up for emergency communications. "Need to meet. Have important information. Airport coffee shop 2 p.m. Come alone, Jessica Bell." Tamara immediately forwarded the message to Alexandra and Marcus, uncertain whether to trust it. "It could be a trap," Marcus warned during their emergency conference call. "Kensington could be using her to lure you out. Or she could genuinely have information that helps our case," Alexandra countered. "We know she witnessed the entire incident and possibly has audio evidence." After careful deliberation, they decided that Marcus would go in Tamara's place, with Alexandra waiting nearby as backup. If Jessica appeared genuine, they would bring her to meet Tamara at a secure location. The airport coffee shop was bustling with travelers when Marcus arrived, taking a seat with clear sightlines to all entrances. He recognized Jessica immediately when she entered, still wearing the large sunglasses that had become her signature during their previous meeting, though she looked more haggard now, constantly glancing over her shoulder. When she spotted Marcus, instead of Tamara, she hesitated before cautiously approaching. "Where's Tamara?" she asked, sliding into the seat opposite him. "Safe," Marcus replied simply. "Why did you want to meet?" Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice. I was fired from the airline the day after we met. Security escorted me from the building, confiscated my company phone, and demanded I sign an NDA before receiving my final paycheck. She pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. But they didn't know I had already backed up the cockpit recording to my personal cloud account. I downloaded a copy before they canceled my access. Marcus didn't reach for the drive immediately. "Why are you helping us? You're risking a lot." Jessica removed her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes and a resolved expression. "Because what happened to that little boy was wrong, and because I'm tired of being complicit in a system that protects people like Kensington while punishing victims." She pushed the drive across the table. The audio clearly captures Warren's racist comments and the sound of the slap. You can hear Elijah crying afterward, and Warren's threats. It's all there. After texting Alexandra, who confirmed the meeting appeared legitimate, Marcus brought Jessica to their current safe house where Tamara was waiting with Reverend Johnson. The reunion between the two women was emotional, with Jessica apologizing repeatedly for not doing more to protect Elijah during the flight. "I was trained to de-escalate, to protect the airline's interests, to avoid confrontation with high-value passengers," she explained bitterly. "The whole system is designed to protect people like Kensington." Alexandra arrived shortly after, immediately securing the thumb drive and beginning the process of authenticating the audio recording. "This is exactly what we needed," she confirmed, after running it through specialized software. "Clear evidence of assault and racial animus. With this, we can potentially overcome the gag order and present compelling evidence to a new judge." But their elation was short-lived. The next morning, Alexandra received notice that Warren Kensington had filed a motion to exclude any audio evidence, claiming it had been obtained illegally and violated federal aviation regulations. Simultaneously, Jessica received a cease and desist letter from the airline's attorneys, threatening criminal charges for theft of proprietary company information. "How did they know?" Tamara asked, stunned by the rapid response. "We were so careful." Marcus's expression darkened. "They're monitoring us somehow. Our emails, our phones, maybe even Alexandra's office." A sweep of their devices revealed sophisticated spyware on Jessica's personal phone, installed remotely after she had backed up the recording but before she had been fired. "They've been tracking her movements, reading her messages, even activating her microphone remotely," Alexandra's IT security consultant confirmed. "This level of surveillance requires serious resources." The revelation sent a chill through the group. If Jessica had been compromised, who else might be? They implemented stringent new security protocols, abandoning potentially compromised devices and communicating only through encrypted channels provided by a veterans group Marcus trusted. Despite these setbacks, Alexandra continued building their legal case, working through the night to prepare for upcoming hearings. The community support network expanded as word spread through trusted channels about Elijah's situation. A local Black physicians group offered to examine Elijah and document his deteriorating condition for court records. A retired judge provided strategic advice on navigating the legal system when facing a powerful opponent. Even local business owners contributed, with a pharmacy providing Elijah's basic medications at cost, and a toy store sending gifts to brighten the boy's increasingly difficult days. But Warren Kensington was escalating his campaign as well. His media outlets began running stories questioning Tamara's fitness as a mother, highlighting her single-parent status and financial struggles as evidence of an unstable home environment. When Marcus's photo appeared alongside articles implying a romantic relationship between him and Tamara, suggesting he was using the situation for personal gain, they realized the attacks were becoming more personal and targeted. "He's trying to discredit us by any means necessary," Alexandra observed grimly, painting Tamara as an unfit mother, Marcus as an opportunist, and me as an ambulance-chasing lawyer seeking publicity. The pressure took its toll on all of them. Tamara lost weight as stress and constant vigilance left little appetite for food. Marcus suffered from insomnia, his post-traumatic stress symptoms resurfacing as the situation increasingly resembled the high-alert conditions he'd experienced. In combat, even Alexandra showed signs of strain, dark circles under her eyes, evidence of too many sleepless nights preparing legal documents, But it was Elijah who suffered most, torn from his routine, denied necessary medical treatment, and sensing his mother's fear despite her efforts to shield him, his condition worsened dramatically. The tremors in his hands spread to his arms and occasionally his legs. His attention span shortened to mere minutes. Most concerning were the increasingly frequent absence seizures, brief moments where he would stare blankly, unresponsive to his name or touch. A pediatric neurologist from the community support network examined him and delivered a sobering assessment. Without proper treatment soon, Elijah might face permanent neurological damage. The news devastated Tamara, who broke down in Alexandra's arms. What kind of person does this to a child? How can he sleep at night knowing he's causing this suffering? Alexandra had no answer, only grim determination. We document everything, every symptom, every seizure, every night of lost sleep. This becomes evidence not just for our case, but for potential criminal charges against Kensington for child endangerment. The next day brought a new challenge. As Alexandra prepared to file their latest motion, she received an urgent call from her law partner. The firm's biggest client is threatening to pull their business unless we drop the Parker case. They won't say it directly, but it's clear Kensington got to them. Alexandra didn't hesitate. Tell them we'll be returning their retainer this afternoon. No client is worth abandoning our principles. Though she spoke with conviction, the reality was stark. Without that client, her small firm would struggle to make payroll for their staff. She didn't share this with Tamara, who already carried enough burdens. That evening, as they gathered in their newest safe house, the home of a community organizer with a state-of-the-art security system, Jessica received a call from a former colleague still working at the airline. "They're saying you stole company property," the colleague whispered. "There's talk of pressing criminal charges. Warren Kensington himself called the CEO demanding action." The walls were closing in, their options narrowing. But as Marcus reminded them, quoting his grandmother's wisdom, "When you're surrounded on all sides, the only way out is through." The question was whether they had the strength to break through the formidable barriers Kensington had erected around them, or if they would be crushed in the attempt. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor as Alexandra West stood at the window of her downtown office, watching the first rays of sunlight glint off the water. She hadn't gone home last night, working straight through to prepare their most aggressive legal strategy yet. The desk behind her was covered with legal texts, case precedents, and empty coffee cups, evidence of a night spent not in surrender, but in careful planning. Marcus entered quietly, carrying fresh coffee and breakfast sandwiches. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, setting down the food. Alexandra took the coffee gratefully. "Sleep is for people who aren't fighting billionaires." She gestured to the document spread across her desk. "But it was worth it. We're not just playing defense anymore. Today we counterattack." Her plan was audacious, filing a comprehensive federal lawsuit against Warren Kensington for assault, discrimination, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and violation of Elijah's civil rights. "If the state courts are compromised by his influence, we go federal," she explained as Tamara joined them, having left Elijah in the care of Reverend Johnson's daughter, a pediatric nurse who could monitor his condition. "And we're not just suing Kensington personally. We're naming his companies, the airline, the hospital, everyone who participated in this coordinated campaign of harassment and discrimination." Tamara looked over the meticulously prepared documents with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Can we really fight all these powerful entities at once?" Alexandra's smile was fierce. "They expect us to be cowed by their resources. Instead, we'll use their size against them. Each defendant will have their own interests to protect, their own reputations to consider. That creates cracks in their united front that we can exploit." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Divide and conquer. Classic military strategy." As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Jessica arrived with news of her own. "I've been approached by 3 other flight attendants who've witnessed similar behavior from Kensington on previous flights. They're willing to give statements anonymously." This was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for, evidence that the incident with Elijah wasn't isolated, but part of a pattern of behavior that Kensington had previously managed to suppress through his influence and wealth. While Alexandra filed their federal lawsuit, Marcus launched the second phase of their counteroffensive, a carefully orchestrated fundraising campaign for Elijah's medical treatment. Working with his Veterans Advocacy Network and several civil rights organizations, he created a secure online platform where supporters could contribute to a trust fund managed by an independent financial firm, ensuring transparency and protection from Kensington's legal attacks. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans groups were the first to rally, many contributors adding personal messages of support for both Elijah and Marcus. Civil rights organizations amplified the campaign through their networks, framing it as a fight against both racial discrimination and corporate abuse of power. Within 24 hours, they had raised enough to cover Elijah's immediate medical needs and secure treatment at a specialized clinic in Canada if necessary. The sudden surge of public support caught Kensington's media empire flat-footed. Despite their control of numerous outlets, they couldn't contain the story as it spread through social media, independent news sites, and word of mouth. Alexandra's strategic filing of the federal lawsuit had generated judicial records that were publicly accessible, allowing journalists from non-Kensington outlets to report on the allegations without fear of defamation claims. Warren Kensington's response was swift and furious. His legal team filed motions to dismiss the federal lawsuit, claiming lack of jurisdiction and failure to state a claim. Simultaneously, they intensified their media campaign, portraying Tamara, Marcus, and Alexandra as opportunists exploiting a minor incident for financial gain and public attention. But their most insidious move came 3 days after the federal filing. Tamara received a call from Alexandra while visiting Elijah's new neurologist, one of the few specialists willing to treat him despite pressure from colleagues with hospital affiliations. Kensington's lawyers reached out, Alexandra said, her voice tight with controlled anger. They're offering a settlement. Tamara's heart raced. What kind of settlement? $2 million for Elijah's medical care, future education, and pain and suffering. Comprehensive coverage of all his needs well into adulthood. It sounded like everything they'd been fighting for, but Alexandra's tone made Tamara hesitate. What's the catch? A non-disclosure agreement, the most restrictive I've ever seen. You would never be allowed to discuss what happened on that flight or anything that followed. No public statements, no private conversations, not even therapy sessions. Elijah would be similarly restricted once he reaches adulthood. She paused. And you would have to make a public statement that you misinterpreted the incident, that Warren Kensington never assaulted Elijah, and that his actions were being a concerned passenger responding to a potential safety issue. The implication was clear. Tamara would have to publicly brand herself a liar and absolve Kensington of all wrongdoing. That would destroy everything we've been fighting for, Tamara said, watching Elijah through the exam room window as the neurologist tested his reflexes. But if it guarantees Elijah gets the care he needs. The neurologist had confirmed what they feared. Without specialized treatment soon, Elijah could face permanent neurological damage. The seizures were becoming more frequent, and his cognitive function was showing signs of impairment. It's your decision, Alexandra said gently. No one would blame you for putting Elijah's health first. Tamara was silent for a long moment, torn between her son's immediate medical needs and the broader principles at stake. When she returned to the safe house that evening, Marcus was waiting with news of his own. The fundraising campaign had reached its initial goal and was still growing. Additionally, a specialist from Johns Hopkins had reached out, offering to review Elijah's case and potentially accept him into a groundbreaking treatment program. We have options, Marcus assured her. You don't have to take Kensington's blood money with all those strings attached. Tamara shared the details of the settlement offer, including the required public statement. Marcus's expression darkened. He wants more than silence. He wants vindication. He wants you to clear his name so he can continue his political ambitions, without this incident hanging over him. The realization strengthened Tamara's resolve. Then he doesn't get it. Elijah and I won't be silenced, not for any amount of money. Alexandra filed their formal rejection of the settlement offer the next morning. By afternoon, Warren Kensington had escalated his attacks to a new and frightening level. A social worker from the Department of Children and Family Services arrived at Alexandra's office, accompanied by 2 police officers, with a court order to conduct an immediate welfare check on Elijah. "We've received multiple reports of medical neglect," the social worker explained, presenting documentation alleging that Tamara was refusing necessary treatment for Elijah's condition and exposing him to unstable living conditions. The timing made it clear this was Kensington's retaliation for rejecting his settlement. Alexandra immediately contacted the judge who had issued the order, presenting evidence of Tamara's ongoing efforts to secure appropriate medical care for Elijah, despite active interference from the very parties now claiming neglect. The judge, unfamiliar with the full context of the case, agreed to a modified arrangement. The welfare check would proceed, but Alexandra could be present, and no action would be taken to remove Elijah without a formal hearing. The investigation itself, however, couldn't be stopped without evidence of bad faith reporting. The social worker was professional and thorough, clearly uncomfortable with the political dimensions of the case, but committed to assessing Elijah's well-being objectively. She noted his deteriorating condition, but also documented the extensive efforts Tamara had made to secure treatment and the stable, if temporary, living arrangements provided by the Community Support Network. "I'll include all of this in my report," she assured Tamara before leaving. "For what it's worth, I see a devoted mother doing everything possible under extremely difficult circumstances." But the investigation itself created a new problem. Now officially in the system, Elijah's case would require follow-up visits and ongoing documentation of his living situation and medical care. The rotating safe houses that had protected them from Kensington's surveillance would no longer be viable under such scrutiny. "We need a more permanent solution," Alexandra acknowledged during their strategy session that evening. "Somewhere Elijah can receive consistent care while remaining protected from Kensington's influence." The answer came from an unexpected source. Jessica, who had been staying with relatives after receiving threats at her apartment, arrived with news. "I've been in contact with a pilot who was in the cockpit during our flight. He's reviewed the recording I saved and confirmed its authenticity. He's willing to testify that Warren Kensington has a history of problematic behavior on flights and that the airline has a pattern of accommodating him despite complaints from crew members." This new witness potentially broke the case wide open. A pilot's testimony would carry significant weight, both in court and in the court of public opinion. But before they could integrate this new information into their strategy, Marcus received an alarming text from one of his veterans group contacts. Warren Kensington had filed for a custody evaluation, claiming that Tamara's erratic behavior and exploitation of her son for financial gain warranted consideration of removing Elijah from her care. The custody filing cited Tamara's employment status, housing instability, and alleged refusal of appropriate medical treatment as evidence of parental unfitness. It named Warren Kensington as an interested party due to his involvement in the original incident and subsequent legal proceedings. "This is beyond outrageous," Alexandra fumed after reviewing the filing. "He has no standing whatsoever to insert himself into custody matters. This is blatant harassment and abuse of the legal system." But outrageous or not, the filing created yet another legal front they had to defend, draining their already stretched resources and adding to the emotional toll on Tamara and Elijah. That night, as a summer storm lashed against the windows of their current safe house, Tamara sat beside Elijah's bed, watching him sleep fitfully. The boy's face, once round and full of childish exuberance, had grown thinner, the shadows beneath, his eyes evidence of his ongoing suffering. She brushed a gentle hand across his forehead, feeling the slight fever that had developed over the past day. "I won't let him win," she whispered, a promise to her son and to herself. "Whatever it takes, we'll get through this together." In the living room, Marcus and Alexandra continued strategizing late into the night, the coffee pot emptying and refilling as they explored every legal avenue and potential ally. They had truth on their side, growing public support, and now, potentially, a credible witness from within the airline itself. But Warren Kensington had billions of dollars, a media empire, political connections, and a demonstrated willingness to use every resource at his disposal to crush anyone who challenged him. The question wasn't whether they could fight, they had no choice but to continue, but whether they could withstand the escalating attacks long enough to bring Kensington to justice. As lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes, they made their plans for the battles ahead, knowing that the worst was likely yet to come. The crisp knock at the door came at 7:15 a.m., precise and official. Tamara, already awake after another night of interrupted sleep monitoring Elijah's fever, felt her stomach clench with dread. Through the peephole, she could see two professionally dressed women standing on the porch of their latest safe house, a modest Cape Cod belonging to a retired civil rights attorney in a quiet suburban neighborhood. "Mrs. Parker, I'm Denise Watkins from the Department of Children and Family Services. This is my colleague, Amanda Torres. We're here for a scheduled home visit." Despite Alexandra's extensive coaching on how to handle this moment, Tamara's hands trembled as she opened the door. The two caseworkers entered with practiced efficiency, their expressions neutral as they assessed the living space. "Elijah is still sleeping," Tamara explained, leading them to the kitchen where she had prepared coffee in anticipation of their arrival. "He had a rough night. The doctor adjusted his medication yesterday, and he's experiencing some side effects." Denise, the lead caseworker, placed a thick folder on the table. "We'll need to see him before we leave. We also have several matters to discuss regarding your case." What followed was an exhaustive interview about Tamara's parenting, Elijah's, medical care, their housing situation, financial stability, and the ongoing legal disputes with Warren Kensington. Though the questions were standard protocol, their thoroughness felt invasive and accusatory. "These temporary housing arrangements," Amanda noted, reviewing her clipboard. "How many times have you relocated in the past 3 weeks?" 7 different locations, Tamara admitted. "We've had security concerns due to threats stemming from the legal case." Denise made a notation in her file. "And Elijah's schooling? He's missed nearly a month of classes. I've been coordinating with his teachers for home assignments. We've also arranged for a tutor through the Community Support Network." Another notation. "Our report indicates that Elijah was denied treatment at Boston Children's Hospital, but has not been enrolled in an alternative treatment program." The implication was clear. They were viewing Tamara's actions as negligent rather than as desperate, measures in extraordinary circumstances. "The hospital denied treatment after interference from Warren Kensington," Tamara explained, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We've been consulting with specialists to find alternative options, but many have declined to take his case after learning of the situation." The questioning continued for nearly an hour before they asked to see Elijah. Tamara led them to the small bedroom where her son lay sleeping, his thin frame dwarfed by the twin bed. The tremor in his hands was visible even in sleep, and the fever had left 2 bright spots of color on his otherwise pale cheeks. Denise gently woke him for a brief assessment, asking simple questions about how he was feeling, whether he was hungry, if he felt safe. Elijah answered dutifully but without his usual spark, his eyes frequently drifting to his mother for reassurance. After completing their assessment, the caseworkers returned to the kitchen to finalize their notes. "We'll be filing our report today," Denise informed Tamara. "Given the unusual circumstances of this case, there will be an expedited review process. We'll need to schedule another visit in 3 days." The unspoken message hung in the air. Their scrutiny would be ongoing and intense. As soon as they left, Tamara called Alexandra, who promised to come immediately. When the attorney arrived an hour later, Marcus was with her, his face grim. "How bad was it?" Alexandra asked, accepting the coffee Tamara offered with grateful hands. "They focused on the housing instability and missed medical treatment," Tamara replied, glancing toward the bedroom where Elijah had fallen back asleep. "Made it sound like I'm neglecting him rather than protecting him from a powerful man trying to destroy us." Marcus paced the small kitchen. "I've got news. My military contacts did some digging on Denise Watkins, the lead caseworker. She previously worked for a family services nonprofit that received significant funding from the Kensington Foundation." Alexandra's eyes narrowed. "That's a clear conflict of interest. We can file a motion to have her removed from the case." She pulled out her tablet, already drafting the necessary paperwork. We need to move quickly. If they're accelerating the review process, they might be planning something more aggressive. Her prediction proved accurate sooner than any of them expected. That afternoon, Alexandra received a call from a colleague at the courthouse. An emergency hearing had been scheduled for the following morning regarding Elijah's case, without formal notification being sent to them. "They're trying to catch us unprepared," Alexandra warned. "This has Kensington's fingerprints all over it. He's called in every favor, pulled every string to expedite this process." Through the night, they prepared their response, gathering medical documentation, character statements from Elijah's teachers and previous doctors, and evidence of the systematic campaign against them. Tamara barely slept, spending hours beside Elijah's bed, memorizing the peaceful moments of his sleep as fear gnawed at her that these quiet moments together might soon be taken from her. The courtroom the next morning was nearly empty, another sign that the hearing had been deliberately scheduled to minimize public attention. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a recent appointee to the family court bench, presided with a stern expression that betrayed no hint of her leanings. Denise Watkins testified first, her assessment clinical and damning. "The child has been moved multiple times in recent weeks, disrupting any sense of stability. He has missed significant school time and has not received consistent medical care for his condition, which appears to be deteriorating." She presented photos taken during the home visit, highlighting Elijah's thin frame and visible tremors as evidence of neglect rather than symptoms of his untreated medical condition. The department's attorney argued that Tamara's obsession with the legal battle against Warren Kensington had compromised her ability to focus on Elijah's needs. "While we understand the difficult circumstances, our primary concern must be the child's welfare. We recommend temporary placement in state custody while Mrs. Parker addresses these issues." Alexandra cross-examined Watkins forcefully, exposing her previous connection to Kensington-funded organizations and highlighting the extraordinary circumstances that had necessitated the frequent moves. She presented their substantial evidence that Kensington himself had actively interfered with Elijah's medical treatment. "This is not neglect," she argued passionately. "This is a mother doing everything humanly possible to protect her child from a powerful individual who has demonstrated a willingness to use every resource at his disposal to punish them for standing up to his assault and discrimination." Just as Alexandra seemed to be gaining traction with the judge, the department's attorney played their trump card. "Your Honor, we've just received concerning new information." He presented a sealed file to the judge. "Hospital records indicate that Mrs. Parker has a history of clinical depression, for which she sought treatment 3 years ago following her divorce. Given the extreme stress of the current situation and her increasingly erratic behavior, there are legitimate concerns about her psychological fitness." The revelation stunned Tamara. Her brief course of therapy after her divorce had been private, the record supposedly protected by medical privacy laws. Someone had illegally accessed and shared her confidential medical information, another violation in Kensington's relentless campaign. Judge Simmons reviewed the records with a furrowed brow before addressing the courtroom. "Given the complex circumstances of this case and the conflicting evidence presented, I am ordering a 2-week temporary placement of Elijah Parker in a specialized state medical facility where he can receive proper evaluation and treatment while these matters are thoroughly investigated." The words hit Tamara like physical blows. 2 weeks separated from her son. 2 weeks during which Kensington and his allies would have time to further manipulate the system against them. 2 weeks in which Elijah would be frightened and alone among strangers. Alexandra immediately requested a stay pending appeal, but Judge Simmons denied it, citing immediate concerns about the child's medical welfare. As the hearing concluded, 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom, accompanied by a different social worker, carrying a small duffel bag of children's clothing. The message was clear. Elijah would be taken directly from their current location to state custody without even allowing Tamara time to explain the situation to him or pack his favorite comfort items. Outside the courthouse, as Tamara struggled to maintain her composure, Marcus spotted a familiar black SUV parked across the street. The same vehicle that had picked up Warren Kensington at the airport weeks earlier. The businessman wasn't present, But his influence was everywhere, invisible strings pulling every aspect of the system to work against them. In a moment of uncharacteristic despair, Tamara turned to Alexandra. Maybe I should just sign his settlement agreement, for Elijah's sake. The admission felt like surrender, the words bitter on her tongue. Alexandra squeezed her hand. That's exactly what he wants, to break you down until you'll agree to anything. But remember, if you sign that NDA, you lose your voice forever. Not just about what happened on that plane, but about everything that's followed. All these injustices would remain hidden. Marcus, who had been on his phone coordinating with their support network, rejoined them with renewed purpose in his eyes. We've got a new development. One of my veteran buddies works security at Kensington's office building. He overheard Kensington discussing the case with his campaign manager. Campaign manager? Alexandra asked sharply. For what? Senate run, apparently. He's planning to announce next month, positioning himself as a law and order candidate who stands up to troublemakers. This whole situation with Elijah isn't just about covering up his assault. It's about eliminating anything that might complicate his political narrative. The revelation gave their fight new context. Kensington wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting his political ambitions, which made him both more dangerous and potentially more vulnerable. Alexandra immediately began formulating a new legal strategy, while Marcus expanded their network of allies, particularly focusing on veterans groups that held significant political influence in Kensington's target constituency. Meanwhile, Tamara was permitted one supervised visit with Elijah at the state facility where he had been placed. The sterile visiting room with its institutional furniture and watchful staff was a far cry from the warm, protective environment she had fought so hard to maintain. Elijah, confused and frightened by the sudden change, clung to her desperately during the brief visit. "When can I come home, Mommy?" he asked repeatedly, his voice small and uncertain. "The doctors here don't listen to me. They don't understand about the bad man." Tamara held him as tightly as regulations allowed, promising that she was doing everything possible to bring him home quickly. But as the visit ended and Elijah was led away by a well-meaning but impersonal staff member, his plaintive cries echoing down the corridor, she felt a profound failure as a mother. The system designed to protect children was being weaponized against them, and her son was paying the price for her decision to stand up against injustice. That night, in the now empty safe house that felt cavernous without Elijah's presence, Tamara reached her breaking point. The weight of the past weeks, the assault, the media attacks, the legal battles, and now the separation from her son, crushed down upon her with unbearable pressure. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to sob openly, releasing the terror and rage and helplessness that had built within her. Marcus and Alexandra sat with her in silent solidarity, offering their presence when words would have been inadequate. When dawn broke, bringing with it another day of fight and struggle, Tamara rose with new resolve born from the crucible of her darkest night. They would not surrender. Not to Kensington, not to a compromised system, not to the overwhelming odds against them. Somewhere in this maze of power and privilege and prejudice, there had to be a path to justice not just for Elijah, but for all who faced similar battles with fewer resources and allies. They just had to find it before time ran out. Has the system ever failed you when you needed it most? Comment number 1 if you believe the child welfare system should never be used as a weapon in legal battles. Or number 2 if you think they made the right call putting Elijah's medical needs first. Like this video if you're outraged by how power and privilege can corrupt our most important institutions, and subscribe to see if Tamara will ever get her son back. How far will Kensington go to silence this family? And will anyone powerful enough finally stand up to him? Boston Children's State Medical Facility stood like a fortress against the autumn sky, its modern architecture belying the institutional rigidity within. For the past 3 days, Tamara had made the same journey. A 40-minute bus ride followed, by a half-mile walk, to visit Elijah during the strictly enforced 1-hour visitation periods. Today, as she signed in at the security desk, the receptionist avoided eye contact, sliding the visitor badge across the counter without a word. Tamara had grown accustomed to these small cruelties. The whispers that followed her through the corridors, the staff who had clearly formed opinions based on media coverage rather than actual interactions. The visiting room was the same as before. Neutral, beige walls, uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a small table with faded children's books and worn board games. A security camera in the corner recorded every interaction, a constant reminder that even these precious moments with her son were under scrutiny. When Elijah was brought in by an attendant, Tamara's heart clenched. In just 3 days, he appeared noticeably thinner, the hospital-issued sweatshirt hanging from his small frame. His eyes, once bright and curious, had a vacant quality that frightened her more than his physical deterioration. "Mommy," he whispered as she embraced him, his thin arms clinging to her with desperate strength. "I want to go home." Tamara fought back tears, aware that any emotional display could be documented and used against her. "I'm working on it, baby. Alexandra and Marcus are doing everything they can." She stroked his hair, noticing a small patch near his temple where it seemed thinner than before. "The doctors here said they're helping me get better," Elijah mumbled, against her shoulder. "But they give me medicine that makes my head foggy. I told them it feels wrong, but they said I have to take it." Alarm bells rang in Tamara's mind. As a nurse, she knew that improper medication could worsen Elijah's condition rather than improve it. "What medicines are they giving you, sweetie? Do you know the names?" Elijah shook his head. "Pills, different colors, and an injection yesterday that made me sleep for a long time." The attending staff member, who had been pretending not to listen from her position near the door, suddenly approached. "Mrs. Parker, discussions of treatment protocols during visitation are discouraged. It can confuse the patient and interfere with therapeutic progress." Tamara gripped the edge of the table, steadying herself. "As his mother and a registered nurse, I have a right to know what medications my son is receiving." The attendant's expression remained impassive. "That information can be requested through proper channels. Dr. Mercer will be conducting the family consultation next week." "Next week?" Tamara's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "That's unacceptable. I need to speak with his doctor today." "I'm afraid that's not possible. Dr. Mercer's schedule is full." The rest of the visit passed in strained conversation, Tamara trying to maintain a positive facade for Elijah's benefit, while internally cataloging the concerning changes in his condition. When the attendant announced that visitation time had ended, Elijah clung to her, something he hadn't done since he was much younger. "Don't leave me here, Mommy," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "The nightmares are worse, and sometimes I can't feel my fingers." It took every ounce of Tamara's strength to gently disengage his fingers from her sweater and watch as he was led away, looking back at her with confusion and betrayal in his eyes. Outside the facility, she called Alexandra immediately, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "They're medicating him inappropriately," she reported, pacing the sidewalk. "He's showing signs of potential neurological side effects, and they won't let me speak to his doctor until next week." Alexandra's voice was tight with controlled anger. "This crosses every line. I'll file an emergency motion for medical oversight today." And Marcus has been coordinating with a neurologist from Johns Hopkins who's willing to review Elijah's case, if we can get access to his current records. That afternoon, as Tamara sat in Alexandra's office reviewing the latest legal filings, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Dr. Chen, Elijah's original neurologist from before the flight incident. "Mrs. Parker," he began hesitantly, "I've been following your case through colleagues. I want you to know that many of us are disturbed by what's happening, even if we've been limited in our ability to speak publicly." Tamara gripped the phone tighter. "Thank you for calling, Doctor. Elijah's condition is deteriorating under state care. They've placed him on a medication protocol that seems to be causing neurological side effects." Dr. Chen's voice lowered further. "That's why I'm calling. I received a consultation request for Elijah's case this morning from the state facility. The medication regimen they've prescribed is contraindicated for his specific neurological profile. I've documented my concerns officially, but I wanted to warn you directly. The revelation confirmed Tamara's worst fears. Either through incompetence or deliberate action, Elijah was receiving treatment that could cause lasting harm. After thanking Dr. Chen profusely for his courage in reaching out, she immediately relayed the information to Alexandra, who added it to their emergency motion. Marcus, who had been working his own angles through veteran support networks, arrived with news from his contact at Kensington's office building. Kensington was overheard boasting about having neutralized the Parker problem. Apparently, he has connections to the medical director at the state facility. They were classmates at Harvard. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Kensington wasn't just separating Tamara from Elijah. He was potentially using his influence to ensure that Elijah's treatment would support the narrative that Tamara had been neglecting his care. Later that evening, as they prepared to submit their emergency filing for the following morning, Alexandra received a call from the courthouse. "That was my clerk contact," she reported grimly after hanging up. "Judge Simmons has taken an unexpected leave of absence. Our case has been reassigned to Judge William Hargrove." Marcus's expression darkened. "Hargrove? Isn't he the one who dismissed 3 civil rights cases last year on procedural grounds?" "Yes." Alexandra's voice was tight. "And he's a regular at Kensington's annual charity gala." Another door closing, another obstacle in their path. When Tamara's phone rang again, the caller ID showing the state facility's number, her heart raced with dread. "Mrs. Parker, this is Nurse Diaz from Boston Children's State Medical Facility. I'm calling to inform you that Elijah has been admitted to the intensive care unit following a severe seizure." The world tilted beneath Tamara's feet. "What happened? How severe? I'm coming right now." "Visiting hours are over, Mrs. Parker. Dr. Mercer has ordered restricted access due to the critical nature of Elijah's condition. You can call for an update in the morning." The clinical detachment in the nurse's voice as she delivered news that shattered Tamara's world was the final straw. "My son is in intensive care, and you're telling me I can't see him? I'm coming. Now. If they try to stop me, I'll have every news outlet in Boston at your door by morning." She hung up before the nurse could respond, already gathering her coat and purse. Alexandra moved quickly to intercept her. "Tamara, wait. This is exactly what they want, you acting emotionally, giving them evidence to support their claim that you're unstable. My son is in ICU. What mother wouldn't react emotionally to that?" Tamara's voice broke. "I can't just sit here while he's suffering alone." Marcus placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You're not going to sit here. We're going together. With Alexandra. Through proper channels. We document everything. We record every interaction. We bring witnesses. We don't give them any ammunition to use against you." His military training provided a framework for action, even in the most desperate situations. Alexandra was already on the phone with a judge she knew personally, seeking an emergency order to grant Tamara access to Elijah regardless of visiting hours. By the time they arrived at the facility, armed with the hastily issued court order, it was past midnight. The night administrator clearly wasn't prepared for their arrival or the legal documentation they presented. After several tense phone calls to superiors, Tamara was finally escorted to the pediatric ICU. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight of Elijah, small and vulnerable amid the tangle of monitoring equipment and IV lines. His face was ashen, except for dark circles beneath his eyes, and a ventilator tube obscured part of his features. A neurologist on call, different from Elijah's regular doctors at the facility, explained that he had experienced status epilepticus, a prolonged seizure state that had required emergency intervention. "We've stabilized him for now, but we're monitoring for potential complications," she explained, her manner more compassionate than others Tamara had encountered at the facility. "Has he had seizures of this severity before?" "Never," Tamara answered, her nurse's training helping her process the medical information even as her mother's heart was breaking. "His condition has never included grand mal seizures, only absent seizures and focal motor symptoms." The neurologist frowned, reviewing Elijah's chart. The medication protocol he was placed on 3 days ago included phenobarbital at a dosage typically reserved for much larger patients. In combination with his other medications, it could have lowered his seizure threshold rather than raising it. Tamara's suspicions were confirmed. The inappropriate treatment had directly contributed to Elijah's current crisis. She remained at his bedside through the night, Alexandra and Marcus taking shifts to ensure she was never alone with hospital staff who might document something that could be used against her. By morning, Elijah's condition had stabilized enough to remove the ventilator, though he remained unconscious. As Tamara gently bathed his face with a cool cloth, murmuring reassurances even though he couldn't hear her, she made a decision. The legal battles, the media war, the constant defense against Kensington's attacks, all of it paled in comparison to her son's immediate safety. If protecting Elijah meant signing Warren Kensington's settlement with its oppressive NDA, then perhaps that was the price she had to pay. Alexandra found her still at Elijah's bedside, having dozed off with her head resting near his hand. "There's been a development," she said softly, rousing Tamara from her fitful sleep. "The on-call neurologist last night filed a report questioning Elijah's treatment protocol. It's triggered an internal review, and more importantly, placed a temporary hold on any changes to his care without oversight from the hospital's ethics committee." It was the first piece of good news they'd had in days, a small ray of light in the darkness that had enveloped them. But as Tamara looked at her son's fragile form, still unconscious after the violent seizure that might have caused lasting damage, she couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late. The system designed to protect the vulnerable had been weaponized against them at every turn. How many more battles could they fight? How much more could Elijah endure? For the first time since their ordeal began, Tamara began to consider not just accepting Kensington's settlement, but actually fleeing with Elijah, perhaps to Canada or beyond, somewhere beyond the reach of Kensington's influence, where they could start over without the shadow of this nightmare hanging over them. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "Whatever you're thinking, remember you're not alone in this fight. Sometimes the darkest moment comes just before breakthrough." Tamara wanted desperately to believe him, but as another round of doctors arrived to evaluate Elijah, their faces unfamiliar and their allegiances unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had reached a breaking point from which there might be no return. The private dining room at Maison Laurent, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, was designed for discretion. Thick carpets absorbed sound, heavy draperies blocked curious eyes, and the staff was trained to be virtually invisible as they served the city's elite. For Alexandra West, dressed in her most conservative suit and feeling distinctly out of place among the old money clientele, the setting was both intimidating and reassuring. If her mysterious contact had chosen this location, they clearly had the means and connections to be a valuable ally. 3 days had passed since Elijah's hospitalization. His condition had stabilized, but he remained under intensive monitoring, his consciousness returning only in brief, confused intervals. The internal investigation into his treatment had expanded, with outside specialists brought in to evaluate the case. Most significantly, Tamara had been granted unrestricted visitation rights and oversight of all treatment decisions going forward, a small victory that had renewed their fighting spirit. Alexandra checked her watch for the 3rd time. Her contact was 10 minutes late, an eternity in her currently overscheduled life. Just as she was considering whether she'd been stood up, the private room's door opened to admit a slender woman in her early 50s, elegantly dressed in a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than Alexandra's monthly mortgage payment. "Ms. West, thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I'm Victoria Kensington." Alexandra couldn't hide her shock. Victoria Kensington, Warren's ex-wife and a prominent philanthropist in her own right, was the last person she had expected. "Mrs. Kensington, this is unexpected." Victoria smiled thinly as she took a seat across from Alexandra. "Please call me Victoria. I haven't been Mrs. Kensington for nearly 5 years, thank goodness." A waiter appeared silently to pour water and present menus, which Victoria waved away. "Just coffee for me, and privacy, please." After the waiter withdrew, Victoria leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped on the table. "I've been following the Parker case with great interest. What Warren has done to that child and his mother is unconscionable, though entirely in character." She reached for her handbag, removing a slim flash drive which she placed on the table between them. This contains documentation you might find useful. Financial records, emails, medical reports, evidence of a pattern of behavior that extends well beyond the current situation. Alexandra stared at the flash drive, not reaching for it yet. Why are you doing this? Why now? Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of something raw and painful beneath. Because I should have done it 5 years ago during our divorce. Instead, I took the settlement and signed the NDA, telling myself that the money would do more good through my foundation than a public battle would. She took a measured breath. But I was wrong. The money bought my silence while Warren continued destroying lives whenever they intersected with his ambitions or ego. Her voice hardened. And now he's targeting a child. I won't be complicit through inaction any longer. Alexandra finally reached for the flash drive. What exactly will I find on here? Evidence that the Parker case isn't isolated. Warren has a documented history of racial discrimination incidents that he's covered up. Medical records from our marriage showing his explosive anger issues and narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, which he abandoned treatment for. Financial records showing patterns of payoffs to silence previous victims. Victoria's perfectly composed expression never wavered, despite the damning information she was sharing. Most importantly, you'll find evidence of his methodology, how he manipulates systems, which specific officials and institutions are compromised by his influence, and the network he uses to destroy his opponents. The information was potentially game-changing. Alexandra's mind raced through the legal implications and strategic advantages this could provide. You realize this violates your non-disclosure agreement? Victoria's smile was cold. Thoroughly. I'm prepared for the consequences. Which would be financially ruinous. Warren's legal team drafted the NDA with punitive damages that would essentially bankrupt me. I've spent the past month discreetly transferring my most meaningful assets to my daughter's name and establishing trusts that can't be touched. The matter-of-fact way she described sacrificing her fortune impressed Alexandra. Why not take this to the authorities directly? Victoria's laugh held no humor. The authorities in this city. Warren plays golf with the police commissioner, funded the district attorney's election campaign, and sits on boards with half the judges. That's why he's been so effective against the Parkers. He spent decades building a network specifically designed to protect him from consequences. She nodded toward the flash drive. That's also why that information needs to be used strategically. Release it all at once and it gets buried. Use it precisely, and it can crack the foundation of his power. Their conversation continued over coffee, Victoria providing insights into Warren's pressure points, fears, and the key allies who might abandon him if approached correctly. As they prepared to leave, Victoria handed Alexandra a business card with a single phone number written on the back. My private line. Use it if you need additional information. I won't volunteer anything else. Plausible deniability is important going forward, but I'll confirm or deny specific questions. She paused at the door. One more thing. Warren is paranoid about surveillance. His security team regularly sweeps for bugs, monitors electronic communications, and maintains extensive dossiers on his opponents. Whatever strategy you develop, assume he's watching and listening. Alexandra returned to her office to find Marcus and Tamara waiting anxiously for news of the mysterious meeting. When she revealed Victoria Kensington's identity and the information she had provided, their reactions mirrored her own initial shock. His ex-wife, Marcus marveled, shaking his head. That's like something from a movie. Tamara remained cautious. Can we trust her? This could be an elaborate setup. Alexandra connected the flash drive to a standalone laptop not linked to their network, a security precaution she'd implemented after discovering their office systems had been compromised. Victoria anticipated that question. The first folder contains documentation of Warren's surveillance and sabotage during their divorce proceedings. She's included verification methods for everything else. As they began reviewing the contents, the true scope of Warren Kensington's operations became clear. His media empire was just the visible portion of his influence. Behind the scenes, he maintained what amounted to a private intelligence operation. Former law enforcement and military contractors who conducted surveillance, gathered compromising, information, and when necessary, took more direct action against his opponents. This explains how he's been staying one step ahead of us, Marcus observed, reviewing a document detailing surveillance techniques, and how he accessed Tamara's private medical records. Alexandra focused on the financial documents, which revealed a pattern of foundations and charitable donations being used to create obligations and dependencies among key officials and institutions. Boston Children's Hospital isn't the only medical facility he's compromised. He's got board members or major donations at every major hospital in the region. Most disturbing was the section detailing previous incidents of discrimination and harassment that had been buried through financial settlements and strategic pressure. "He's done this before," Tamara said softly, reading accounts that echoed their own experience with sickening familiarity. "So many times." Armed with this new intelligence, they worked through the night developing a comprehensive strategy. Rather than trying to fight Kensington on all fronts simultaneously, they would identify the weakest links in his network and apply pressure selectively, creating cascading failures that would eventually isolate him from his support system. The first target they identified was Judge Hargrove, who had been assigned their case after Judge Simmons's convenient leave of absence. Victoria's documents revealed that while Hargrove had accepted Kensington's hospitality and donations, he had a far more compromising connection. His son had been involved in a drunk driving incident that had been kept out of public records through Kensington's intervention. "We don't need to expose this publicly," Alexandra explained. "Just letting Hargrove know we're aware of it should be enough to ensure he either recuses himself or begins ruling more impartially." Similarly, they identified the hospital board member who had been instrumental in denying Elijah's treatment, a woman whose pharmaceutical company had received favorable coverage in Kensington's publications while competitors were subjected to negative stories. Having mapped out their strategy, they were preparing to implement the first phase when Marcus received an urgent call from the security contractor he'd hired to monitor their safe house. "Ms. West's home was broken into 30 minutes ago," he reported. "Professional job. They disabled the security system and went straight for the office." Alexandra's blood ran cold. "The flash drive. Did they find it?" "Unknown. They took her laptop and several files. Police are on scene now." The implications were clear. Someone had learned about Victoria's meeting with Alexandra and moved quickly to intercept the information she had provided. Fortunately, Alexandra's paranoia had led her to bring the flash drive directly to her office rather than stopping at home. "We need to warn Victoria," Tamara said, already reaching for her phone. "If they know she's helping us." The call went straight to voicemail. A second attempt yielded the same result. Alexandra used the private number Victoria had provided, but it too was unavailable. Marcus was already pulling up news sites on his tablet. Nothing about Victoria Kensington in the breaking news. That's something at least. They debated their next moves, aware that the timeline for their strategy had just been dramatically accelerated. If Kensington knew they had evidence that could damage him, he would move aggressively to neutralize the threat. A text message from an unknown number interrupted their discussion. "V-safe. Evidence compromised. Resident security footage shows WK personal security team. Proceed with caution." The message self-deleted seconds after they read it. "At least she's safe," Tamara said, shoulders sagging with relief. "But if Kensington's people took evidence from her home, they know exactly what she gave us." Alexandra's expression was grim but determined. "Then we don't wait. We implement the strategy tonight. Marcus, contact your veterans network. We need security for Tamara and surveillance on Kensington's key allies. I'll prepare the legal filings and contact Judge Hargrove personally." As they mobilized their resources, a new message arrived from the hospital where Elijah was being treated. Despite the investigation into his care and the restrictions that had been placed on treatment changes, his primary doctor had been replaced with a new physician who was proposing yet another medication protocol. Tamara was being granted a supervised visit the following morning to discuss treatment options, a transparent attempt to regain control of Elijah's care now that Kensington knew they had evidence against him. "They're getting desperate," Marcus observed. "Making mistakes." Alexandra nodded grimly. Let's make sure those mistakes cost them everything. The downtown offices of Boston Legal Aid didn't typically host press conferences. The modest conference room, with its scuffed table and mismatched chairs, stood in stark contrast to the polished media centers where Warren Kensington typically held court. But today, as journalists from local and national outlets crowded into the small space, the humble setting served a purpose, highlighting the David versus Goliath nature of the battle they were fighting. Alexandra stood at the front of the room, flanked by representatives from the Veterans Justice Coalition, the Urban Rights Legal Defense Fund, and the Children's Health Advocacy Network. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind of strategic action following Victoria Kensington's revelations. Judge Hargrove had abruptly recused himself from their case after a private meeting with Alexandra, in which no explicit threats were made, but the message was unmistakably clear: impartial justice or public exposure. The hospital board member, who had interfered with Elijah's treatment, had suddenly resigned for personal reasons, following a similar conversation with the Children's Health Advocacy Network. Most significantly, 3 former employees of Kensington Media Group had come forward with their own stories of discrimination and harassment after being contacted by Marcus's Veterans Network, which had identified them through Victoria's documents. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Alexandra began, her voice steady despite the enormity of what they were about to do. "We've called this press conference to address serious allegations of corporate misconduct, abuse of power, and systematic discrimination perpetrated by Warren Kensington and his various business entities." She outlined the Parker case briefly, focusing on the documented facts rather than emotional appeals. What began as a disturbing incident of racial discrimination and assault against a 7-year-old child has revealed a pattern of behavior that extends far beyond a single event. The representatives from each organization then presented aspects of the evidence they had gathered, careful to include only what could be independently verified without Victoria Kensington's direct involvement. As the press conference continued, Tamara was at the hospital with Elijah, accompanied by an independent neurologist who had volunteered to evaluate his condition. The boy's health had improved slightly since the seizure crisis, but he remained weak and disoriented, the inappropriate medications having taken a severe toll on his developing nervous system. The new doctor assigned to his case, clearly another Kensington ally, had been visibly unsettled by the presence of the independent specialist and the hospital administrator, who had suddenly become extremely attentive to the case following the board member's resignation. Meanwhile, Marcus was coordinating with Jessica, who had finally managed to recover a second backup of the cockpit recording from her personal cloud storage. After being fired from the airline and threatened with legal action, she had maintained a low profile, but the momentum building against Kensington had given her the courage to come forward again. The recording was currently being authenticated by a forensic audio expert who had worked with Marcus's Veterans Organization in the past. Back at the press conference, reporters were asking increasingly pointed questions as they recognized the significance of the story unfolding before them. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Kensington used his influence to deny medical care to a child as retaliation for reporting his assault?" one journalist asked. Alexandra's response was measured but unflinching. "The evidence indicates a clear pattern of interference with Elijah Parker's medical treatment following the incident. We have documented at least 7 medical professionals who were pressured to either deny care or provide inappropriate treatment." Another reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Kensington is scheduled to appear on National Morning today in 20 minutes to address these allegations. His representatives have described this as a coordinated smear campaign. Your response?" "We welcome Mr. Kensington's public comments," Alexandra replied. "Transparency serves the truth. We're prepared to substantiate every allegation we've made today in court, with evidence and witness testimony." What none of them knew was that Warren Kensington was already seated in the National Morning Today studio, receiving last-minute makeup touches while scrolling through notes his public relations team had prepared. The talking points were designed to position him as the victim of a vindictive campaign orchestrated by activist lawyers and special interest groups with political agendas. The network had agreed to a friendly format, a one-on-one interview, with a host known for softball questions and deference to powerful guests. The stage was set for Kensington to regain control of the narrative. The broadcast began with the host introducing the story as a controversy surrounding a prominent businessman and philanthropist, framing it immediately as a matter of perspective rather than established facts. Warren Kensington appeared solemn and slightly aggrieved as the cameras turned to him. "Thank you for providing this opportunity to address these baseless accusations," he began. "What we're seeing is unfortunately common in today's climate. A minor incident being weaponized through social media and activist pressure to attack a successful business leader." The host nodded sympathetically. "Can you tell us about the original incident that started all this?" Kensington launched into his carefully crafted version of events, describing an unruly child creating a safety hazard on a flight and a concerned passenger who merely reached back to prevent further disruption. "At no point did I strike the child, despite what these activists are claiming. This entire narrative has been manufactured to extort money and generate publicity for the lawyers involved." As he continued his polished defense, neither he nor the host noticed a production assistant rushing onto the set, frantically signaling to the director. Seconds later, the host's earpiece crackled with urgent instructions. "We're receiving breaking news relevant to this interview," the host announced, momentarily thrown off script. "We're going to play some audio that has just been authenticated and released to multiple news outlets." Before Kensington could object, the studio speakers filled with the unmistakable ambient noise of an aircraft cabin, followed by his own voice. "Keep your filthy hands off my seat." The sound of a slap was clearly audible, followed by a child's cry of pain and a woman's shocked protest. The recording continued, capturing Kensington's subsequent threats and racially charged comments that he had repeatedly denied making. As the audio played, a split screen showed Kensington's face, his expression transforming from confidence to confusion to barely controlled rage. When the recording ended, the studio sat in stunned silence. The host, visibly uncomfortable, turned to Kensington. "Mr. Kensington, would you care to respond to what we've just heard?" Kensington's training abandoned him. "That recording is clearly doctored. This is a criminal violation of privacy laws. My attorneys will be—" The host interrupted, something that would have been unthinkable minutes earlier. "The network has had this authenticated by 2 independent audio forensic experts who confirm it has not been altered. It appears to directly contradict your previous statements about the incident." What followed was a public meltdown, as Kensington's carefully constructed facade crumbled under pressure. He accused the network of ambushing him, threatened the host personally, and stormed off the set while still wearing his microphone, which captured him ordering an assistant to destroy that flight attendant and find out who leaked that recording. The footage went viral within minutes, trending across all social media platforms and being replayed on competing networks. By the time Tamara returned from the hospital to Alexandra's office, the landscape had shifted dramatically. Warren Kensington's public image was imploding in real time, with former associates and business partners scrambling to distance themselves from him. Political figures who had been courting his support for their campaigns issued statements condemning discrimination and assault. The airline announced an internal investigation into how the original recording had been misplaced during the initial complaint process. Most significantly, Judge Eleanor Simmons, who had been on a conspicuously timed leave of absence, had returned to the bench and requested that all Parker-related cases be reassigned to her court for a comprehensive review. "It's working," Marcus said in wonder as they watched the cascade of developments. "The whole house of cards is collapsing." Alexandra remained cautiously optimistic. "Kensington still has resources and allies. This is a significant blow, but we need to press our advantage while he's off balance." The court proceedings the following day reflected their changing fortunes. Judge Simmons, perhaps eager to demonstrate her impartiality after questions about her initial rulings, ordered an immediate review of Elijah's placement in state custody. The evidence of interference with his medical care, now supported by testimony from hospital staff who had previously been too intimidated to speak, painted a damning picture of systemic abuse of power. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the clear evidence of improper influence on medical decisions, Judge Simmons ruled, "I am ordering Elijah Parker's immediate release from state custody and return to his mother, with arrangements for appropriate medical treatment to be determined by independent specialists." The courtroom erupted in applause, which the judge allowed briefly before restoring order. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters had gathered. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, medical professionals, and ordinary citizens moved by the story of a mother fighting against overwhelming odds to protect her child. As Tamara emerged, their cheers washed over her like a cleansing wave. "This isn't over yet," Alexandra cautioned, as they made their way to the car that would take them to the hospital to retrieve Elijah. "Kensington is wounded but dangerous. We need to remain vigilant until all the legal proceedings are complete." Her warning proved prescient when they arrived at the hospital to find an unexpected complication. Hospital security blocked their entry, citing security concerns, and claiming that arrangements for Elijah's discharge were still being processed despite the court order. As they argued with increasingly obstinate staff, Marcus received an alert from his security contact. Kensington was seen entering the hospital through a private entrance 20 minutes ago. He's somewhere in the building. The implication was clear. Having lost in court, Kensington was making one last desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. Alexandra immediately called Judge Simmons's chambers, securing an emergency enforcement order with police assistance. By the time the officers arrived, hospital administrators had mysteriously located the necessary discharge paperwork and were suddenly cooperative. Elijah, pale and weakened, but smiling at the sight of his mother, was wheeled out in a wheelchair, his few possessions in a hospital-issued plastic bag on his lap. Of Warren Kensington, there was no sign. As they helped Elijah into the car, a hospital employee approached surreptitiously. Mr. Kensington left through the service entrance when security alerted him that police were coming, she whispered. He was furious. "I thought you should know. He was on the phone talking about catching a private flight." Alexandra immediately relayed this information to their legal team, who contacted authorities. The final confrontation came not in a courtroom, but at a private airfield outside Boston, where federal agents intercepted Warren Kensington as he attempted to board his private jet. The charges included witness tampering, evidence obstruction, and civil rights violations, federal offenses that even his network of influence couldn't easily dismiss. As footage of Kensington being escorted from his plane in handcuffs appeared on news broadcasts nationwide, Tamara, Elijah, Marcus, and Alexandra watched from the secure location where they would remain until all legal matters were resolved. "Is it really over?" Elijah asked sleepily, his head resting against his mother's shoulder. Tamara stroked his hair gently. "Almost, baby. And when it is, we're going to help make sure this doesn't happen to other families." Outside, reporters clamored for statements and cameras flashed, documenting a moment that would become a symbol of resistance against privilege and power. But inside their temporary sanctuary, there was only quiet relief and the beginning of healing for a mother and child who had faced the worst of American injustice and emerged, against all odds, with their dignity and truth intact. The federal courthouse in downtown Boston stood as a monument to justice, its imposing columns and broad marble steps representing the ideal, if not always the reality, of equal treatment under law. On this crisp autumn morning, the building was surrounded by news vans, activists with signs, and ordinary citizens drawn by the extraordinary case that had captured national attention. Inside Courtroom 3, Judge Marilyn Chen presided over what many were calling the most significant civil rights case in the city's recent history. 3 months had passed since Warren Kensington's attempted flight and subsequent arrest. In that time, the facade of impunity he had built around himself had crumbled piece by piece. As former allies distanced themselves, employees came forward with their own allegations, and investigations revealed the extent of his abuse of power. Today's hearing would determine whether the civil settlement proposed by Kensington's new legal team, his previous attorneys having abandoned him as his empire began to collapse, would be accepted by the court as sufficient restitution for the harm caused to Elijah Parker and his mother. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with priority seating given to representatives from civil rights organizations, medical ethics committees, and veterans advocacy groups whose support had been crucial in bringing the case to this point. Marcus sat in the first row directly behind Tamara and Alexandra, his military posture undiminished despite the emotional toll of the past months. Elijah was absent from the proceedings, attending his first day back at school after weeks of intensive therapy to address both his neurological condition and the psychological trauma he had endured. Judge Chen, known for her meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to procedure, reviewed the proposed settlement terms with a scrutiny that made Kensington's attorneys visibly uncomfortable. The financial compensation was substantial: $10 million for Elijah's medical care, education, and future needs, plus another $5 million for Tamara to compensate for lost wages, emotional distress, and legal expenses. But the non-monetary provisions were equally significant: a binding agreement that neither Kensington nor any entity he controlled would ever again interfere with the Parkers' lives, mandatory diversity training for all Kensington Media Group employees, and an independent oversight committee to monitor compliance with anti-discrimination policies across his businesses. Before rendering my decision, Judge Chen addressed the courtroom. "I wish to hear from the plaintiff." She turned to Tamara. "Mrs. Parker, you have experienced extraordinary hardship as a result of Mr. Kensington's actions. Does this settlement represent justice in your view?" Tamara rose slowly, her composure a hard-won achievement after months of turmoil. "Your Honor, no amount of money can fully repair the damage done to my son, the nightmares that still wake him, the trust in institutions that has been shattered, the innocence lost when he learned that some people would hurt him simply because of his skin color." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But this settlement does provide the resources to secure his future and help him heal. More importantly, the public accountability it creates may prevent other families from experiencing what we endured." Judge Chen nodded thoughtfully before turning her attention to the defendant's table. Warren Kensington sat subdued in an expensive but conservative suit, a shadow of the commanding figure who had once dominated boardrooms and charity galas. His attempt to flee the country had resulted in his release on bail with electronic monitoring and travel restrictions. The media empire he had built was now being managed by a board of directors who had distanced themselves from his personal, legal troubles. "Mr. Kensington, do you wish to address the court before I rule on this settlement?" Kensington rose stiffly, his expression carefully neutral. His new legal team had clearly coached him extensively on appearing remorseful, without making statements that could further jeopardize his pending criminal cases. "Your Honor, I accept the terms of this settlement and acknowledge the harm caused by my actions." The rehearsed statement, devoid of genuine contrition, prompted murmurs of dissatisfaction throughout the courtroom. Judge Chen's expression remained impassive as she considered the proceedings before her. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, I find the proposed settlement to be appropriate compensation for the documented harms suffered by Elijah and Tamara Parker." She adjusted her glasses, fixing Kensington with a penetrating gaze. "However, I am adding the following judicial conditions. First, Mr. Kensington will make a public statement acknowledging the factual events as established by evidence, including the assault and subsequent retaliation. Second, he will fund an independent foundation dedicated to combating discrimination in healthcare and legal systems, with no involvement in its governance or operations." She turned back to Tamara. "Mrs. Parker, you and your son have demonstrated extraordinary courage in standing against powerful forces that sought to silence you. This court recognizes your contribution to the broader pursuit of justice." With a decisive tap of her gavel, Judge Chen closed a case that had exposed the vulnerabilities of systems meant to protect the most innocent and the insidious ways that privilege could corrupt institutions. Outside the courthouse, Tamara emerged into autumn sunshine to find hundreds of supporters cheering her name. Jessica Bell, the flight attendant whose bravery had provided crucial evidence, pushed through the crowd to embrace her, both women overcome with emotion at the journey they had shared. Marcus and Alexandra followed, surrounded immediately by reporters seeking statements. Alexandra handled the legal questions with her characteristic precision, while Marcus stood protectively near Tamara, still watchful despite their victory. "What happens now?" a journalist called out to Tamara as she prepared to leave. She paused, considering the question that went beyond legal proceedings to the heart of their experience. "Now we heal. We rebuild what was broken, and we remember that justice requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to stand together against injustice." even when the odds seem overwhelming. As they drove away from the courthouse, Tamara's phone rang with a call from Elijah's school. For a moment, old fears resurfaced, but they dissolved as she heard her son's excited voice. "Mom, I got to tell my whole class about how you and Marcus fought the bad man and won. My teacher said we're learning about something called civil rights heroes next week, and you might be in the book someday." Tamara laughed through sudden tears, sharing a glance with Marcus in the rearview mirror. The road ahead would still hold challenges. Elijah's ongoing medical needs, the psychological recovery from trauma, rebuilding their lives after months of disruption. But they would face those challenges from a position of strength rather than desperation, with resources to ensure Elijah received the best possible care and a support network that had proven its commitment through the darkest days. 1 year later, on a bright spring afternoon, Elijah Parker stood confidently before a group of children seated in a community center circle. At 8 years old, his medical condition was finally properly managed, the tremors in his hands almost entirely gone. Behind him, Marcus Daniels arranged chairs for the parents observing from the periphery, his prosthetic leg now adorned with colorful stickers that Elijah had carefully selected. "Welcome to Sky's No Limit," Elijah announced, using the name they had chosen for the support group he and Marcus had established for children who had experienced discrimination. "Today, we're going to talk about speaking up when something isn't right, even if the person doing the wrong thing seems really powerful." As Elijah led the children through activities designed to build confidence and resilience, Tamara watched from the doorway, her nursing scrubs indicating she had come directly from her shift at the new community health center where she now worked. As a patient advocate, Victoria Kensington stood beside her, their unlikely friendship having blossomed after the case concluded. "He's remarkable," Victoria observed quietly. "His strength reminds me so much of you." Tamara smiled, watching her son demonstrate to a younger child how to stand tall when feeling afraid. "He reminds me that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating an adversary, but in refusing to let adversity define you." Outside the windows, Boston continued its busy rhythm, largely unchanged by the drama that had unfolded within its institutions and courtrooms. But in this room, and in similar gatherings across the city where Jessica now spoke to flight crews about intervention strategies, where Alexandra taught law students about ethical obligations, where medical professionals discussed protocols for identifying when external pressures compromised patient care, the ripples of their struggle continued to spread. Warren Kensington's political ambitions had been permanently destroyed, his empire diminished, though not entirely dismantled. More importantly, the systems he had manipulated had been exposed and partially reformed. Not completely. No single case could accomplish that, but significantly enough that the next child facing injustice might find more protection and fewer barriers to truth. As Elijah concluded the session with the group's regular affirmation, "The sky has no limits." And neither do we, Tamara reflected on their journey. From a moment of shocking violence at 30,000 feet, to the depths of despair when the system closed against them, and finally to this place of purpose and healing. They had done more than survive. They had transformed their pain into purpose, their struggle into strength for others. Justice, they had learned, was not simply a verdict or settlement. It was a constant process of standing firm against wrong, supporting one another through darkness, and believing that even the most powerful forces of prejudice and privilege could be overcome when truth and compassion stood united against them. For Elijah Parker, whose small hand had once been struck by hatred, but was now extended in help to others, the sky truly had no limits. And in his courage, in his mother's determination, in the community that had ultimately rallied around them, perhaps there was a map for others to follow when facing their own seemingly impossible battles against injustice. The story of Elijah and Tamara Parker reveals profound truths about justice in America. When power and privilege collide with discrimination, the systems designed to protect the vulnerable can be weaponized against them. Warren Kensington's ability to manipulate media, healthcare, and legal institutions demonstrates how wealth and influence can corrupt safeguards meant to ensure equal treatment. Yet the narrative also illuminates the power of persistence and community. One person standing against injustice, Marcus on the airplane, created a ripple effect that eventually gathered enough force to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. True justice required the combined efforts of diverse allies, a veteran with moral courage, an attorney who prioritized principle over profit, a flight attendant who risked her career, and a mother who refused to surrender her child's dignity. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that silence serves oppression. The non-disclosure agreements, the institutional pressures to look away, the bystanders who initially did nothing, all enabled discrimination to flourish. Only when people found the courage to speak truth, regardless of consequences, did justice become possible. The battle against discrimination is never won in a single courtroom victory. It requires vigilance, solidarity, and the willingness to stand up for others even when personal risk is high. In Elijah's journey from victim to advocate, we see how transforming personal pain into collective purpose creates lasting change that extends far beyond a single case. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent because speaking up seemed too risky? Comment below with a time you stood up against injustice or wish you had. If this story moved you to reflect on power, dynamics in your own community, please like and subscribe to support more content that explores these critical social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that when good people unite against injustice, even the most powerful systems can be changed. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. May we all find the courage of Elijah, the determination of Tamara, and the moral clarity of Marcus when confronting the injustices in our own lives.